Hello and welcome to episode 304 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, how you doing?
I'm excited, Andy. I'm pumped because we've got a guest on the show. I'll come on to more about that obviously shortly, but anybody who listens to the podcast knows that we don't have guests on very often. We're very particular, so I'm excited. I know you're excited, Andy. Before we crack on with what's on the podcast, I know you've been very excited about Alexa. So tell the listeners what it is that you've discovered, or no, not discovered, what you've done.
Well, it's you've already broken the first cardinal rule of mentioning her name, because there's speakers going off in people's houses all over the place now. But I think it's quite funny. Yes, so with smart speakers, as you mentioned her name, Alexa, we've been working in the background just trying to improve functionality of various bits and pieces. And back in sort of October, November, Amazon Music got in touch with us and said, put your podcast on our service. And of course we did that, and we've been tweaking things in the background. And I was just playing around with that service recently, and we can now, our listeners can now ask their smart speaker, especially the Alexa version of the smart speakers, to not only play our podcast just from voice recognition. It's been able to do that for a while through Spotify and various other means, iTunes, if you link it in. But actually through Amazon Music itself, they've improved the functionality of that search. So you can now ask your smart speaker to play particular podcast numbers and titles, and they've never been able to do that before. It's to do with the technical aspects of linking up Spotify and iTunes with these smart speakers. But yeah, so when Damien in the future says to you, go and do your homework, listen to this podcast number, you can hit pause on your device and you can ask your smart speaker to go ahead and play that podcast number, and it should kick into life.
I'm going to wreck people's lives, Andy, because I'm going to tell them exactly what you say, because I know that you showed me and you said, Alexa, play the latest episode of the Money to the Masses podcast on Spotify. That used to be the instruction, but now you can drop the on Spotify bit and it will then go and play that podcast. But with this new functionality, you could say, Alexa, go and play episode 102 of the Money to the Masses podcast, and she'll go and find it and just play it. So it's a small thing, but I know that a lot of people who listen to our podcast in the kitchen, for example, while they're doing the washing up or whatever it is, and it means you can actually control a bit more about the podcast. Small things, but it's quite exciting. Andy's sort of looking into this world of voice search and things like that. So yeah, Andy is excited by this. Let me tell you, he showed me a video call to tell me that this could happen, and he was showing me in his kitchen. So yeah, good work, Andy. Right, I'm going to tell you what's on the podcast this week. The first, this isn't the order actually, but one of the pieces is the Black Book. I mentioned the Black Book last week, and the idea that there would be, like a plane when it crashes as a black box, they try and find, unfortunately, I mean, that happened this week. The very thing happened. The plane went missing, and they go look for the black box to try and find out what happened and piece together the whole situation. I like the idea of having one of those for your own personal finances should the worst happen, that you become incapacitated or you die. So your spouse, partner, family, friends, whoever's trying to sort your finances can piece together what's going on. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to do probably the quickest ever piece on the podcast, but a really relevant piece for everybody to do. So even if the Black Book idea doesn't interest you, this one task I want people to do this week should be listened to. And of course, we've got the podcast guest. So the guest themselves is Jordan Cox. Now, when we did the live event 18 months ago, Jordan Cox was incredibly popular. He's known as the Coupon Kid. If you have ever heard the story, you probably did actually a while ago, of a guy who travelled, I think it was from Manchester to London, but worked out it was cheaper to get a plane via somewhere like Berlin than to get the train. And he did that, and that went viral. In fact, he appeared on telly about it. He's the guy who does all of those sorts of things. He's very good at money saving. Like I say, he's very popular at our live event, and he runs a blog, Jordan Cox. So I asked him to come on because he's actually launched a podcast, but we're going to speak to Jordan because he's going to tell us his favourite apps and websites. So Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's great to have you on. It's something that we talked about for a long time. You and I said to you before, we we've got to get you on the podcast. And it's never happened. And now that you're launching, or you've launched your own podcast, it's a perfect time to get you on. And in fact, Andy will confirm you're one of an exclusive group of people who've actually been on the podcast live and be interviewed. We've had some of the live events that we've done in the past. We put them on snippets on the podcast. So we've heard other people's voices, but there's not been many people that have been on the show who we've actually chatted to. So technically your voice has been on once before, and we did a little snippet from the live event a couple of years ago, but you are one of the select groups. So you'll get a mug that says I've been on the podcast.
Fantastic. I'm honoured. I've already got a Money to the Masses mug, so I need to start building up a collector's edition of all these different mugs.
There is actually almost a tree. I think I'm looking across the room, and there are actually 6 mugs that have been made in existence. A bit like those NatWest pigs. Yeah, 6. And you have I think I am the only person technically that has all 6, but as you'd expect. So Jordan, anyway, great to have you on the show. Tell me about your new podcast that you've launched.
Yeah, so I launched a new podcast on the 1st of January this year called the Secrets to Saving Money podcast. And it's basically ways for you to cut back on your spending in every portion of your life. So whether it's going shopping in a supermarket, spending money online, if you've got kids, ways to save money on that. And it's just going through different ways to cut back. And I'm not about the sort of, you can use lemon as cleaning to make sure that all of your kitchen's sparkling. That's sort of not what I do. I really like the apps, the websites, the things that you might not know about, which will completely transform your life, both in time and in money. So every single week, I'll be going through a big topic of how to save money on a certain area, and then give you a deal of the week. So hopefully you can save money every time you listen.
So what inspired the podcast? You finally got round to it, because when we did the event, you were incredibly popular, actually, at the event. We sent out a questionnaire afterwards and said, what did people like about the event? And we're always trying to do these things to try and get feedback so we can improve them. And actually, you were one of the most popular things in the event, which was nice. So what actually inspired you to finally do the podcast? Because it's something I thought you should have done a long time ago.
Well, I've been blogging and saving money since I was 15, so it's been 8 years now. I'm now 23. And I started self-employment at the start of 2020. I was working for Money Saving Expert for about 4 years. And when I sort of went self-employed, I knew I wanted to do a lot of things like a podcast, YouTube channel, blog, just sort of expand my bow a bit. But it was basically just time. And I remember speaking to you and Andy, actually, just before I went self-employed, and you were both like, you need to start a podcast. That's where you can get a lot of listeners and a lot of people on your content. And I did not find the time last year. So I thought, new year, new me. It's been a year since I've been self-employed. It would be great to start something else up that people can listen to as well. So it's something I've wanted to do for a while, but now is the time that I've actually got around to doing it.
So new year, new me, new lockdown. You might as well sit in a room and talk to a microphone and actually get a podcast out. I think it's fantastic, because do go and listen to the podcast. What's the podcast title again, Jordan, so people can find it?
It's Secrets to Saving, or Secrets to Saving Money, and you can find it basically wherever you get podcasts.
So now we've got you on the podcast because we want you to tell us your top saving apps or websites, the things you can't live without, given that you are the money-saving guru out there. I love the way you chuckle, but you really are, because you end up on TV and all sorts. You are the guru, and I think people love when you rattle through some of the stuff that you use, because it gives a lot of insight. So take it away with some of your favourite apps and websites.
Okay, so I've got 10 different apps that you can download, which are probably my must-haves for 2021. So the first one that I'm starting off with is Stocard, or Stockard, which is STOCARD. This isn't really to do with saving money, but it's more time saving and aggro saving. So it's basically an app loyalty card. So you can add all of your loyalty cards on there from your own wallet or your purse. So if you've got a Tesco one, a Boots one, a Superdrug one, a Morrison's one, you can add it digitally to Stockard's app. So you don't have to keep carrying around your loyalty cards everywhere you go, and you can just scan it from your app. So it saves a lot of time and a lot of stress, and it means you don't have to carry them around in your wallet anymore. So you'll be a little bit more free when you're out shopping.
That's quite neat, though. There are people who have loads of reward cards. I'm terrible. I'm the guy at the checkout where I always say, don't worry about the reward cards. I know you're going to be sitting there and thinking,
what?
Yeah, I know. I have to say, whenever I talk to you, I do take away something, and I do end up trying to be better at the sort of the couponing side of things, that money saving angle, because it's never been my forte. So moving on from that, give me another one.
I love how I put the fear of God in you whenever you.
That's what you need sometimes. It's almost like having a teacher that's telling you off, and then if you keep getting told off, you get put into tension enough, you will do your homework.
Yeah.
So yeah, we like that. So what's the next app?
So a brand new app that launched last year is Lidl Plus. So if you're a Lidl shopper and you haven't downloaded the Lidl Plus app, I recommend you do this week, because you can get a £5 off £25 spend if you're a new app user. So just download the app, it's Lidl Plus, sign up, you get £5 off. And the Lidl app, if you're a regular Lidl shopper, it can save you a lot of money over time. So there's loyalty scheme on there. So if you spend over £100, you get a £2 coupon. And if you spend over £200 in a calendar month, you get an extra £10 coupon on top of that £2. So you can save up to £12 a month just on those. And then there are coupons for items which rotate every Thursday. So you can end up saving quite a bit of money if Lidl is your regular place of shopping.
Do you have a favourite supermarket, Jordan? Am I going to be putting you on the spot here? That when I sit there and say that if there was a supermarket chain of choice, because I've tried a number of them in lockdown, partly because of the delivery slots. So if you can actually be able to get some shopping, you've got to the point where you would go with anybody, people you didn't normally use. And then my wife and I would have a discussion, and she might say, well, I think this supermarket is actually more expensive than another one. And they might have a deal or something that seems to make it cheaper, but then when you analyse it, it's not. Is there a supermarket which you would favour if you were to shop because you think it is generally cheaper?
So a few years ago, Tesco was my favourite, but that's because of their coupon policy. I used to use so many coupons, apps, that kind of thing, to save money while I was there. And recently, I have switched to the Aldis and Lidls, not only because they're cheap, but also because you've got the Lidl app now, and the quality of their food is actually quite a bit better. Like the Aldi meats and the Aldi wines, they've all won awards for their products. So I actually shop there now. I shop in the discount places. And now the Lidl Plus app is here. That's basically gospel to me now.
Good God, I've probably just calls the PR people at Lidl and that to suddenly want to start quoting that they like Jordan Cox's view that it's his favourite supermarket. But anyway, I'm just intrigued because I'm always up for changing supermarkets. I'm not loyal to any brand. So anyway, on to the next one.
So my next one is petrol prices. And this is probably a great app if you're constantly on the go, if you're always traveling on the car, because wherever you are in the country, if you log onto this app, you can load up the nearest petrol stations near you, and it will tell you which one is cheapest. So it will say which one you can go to within a 5-mile radius, 10-mile radius. You can set it as whatever you want, and it will tell you where to go to find the cheapest price for petrol. And sometimes you can save between 5p to 10p a litre, depending on which one you go to. So that could add up to a lot of money, not just in its own trip. If you keep doing this every single time, then you can save quite a bit of money in the long run as well. So next up, I've got Trading 212. So I'm not really a trader. I know this is probably your sort of eyes in the back of my head moment. I don't really deal in stocks and shares and investing, that kind of thing. But I have found there's a cool little way with Trading 212 to earn a bit of extra money. There's a refer a friend scheme on there. So if you refer a friend through the app and they deposit £1, then you both get a free share worth up to £100. And I'm not a trader, so I usually get the share into my account. I cash it out, so I sell it, and then I've got the money sitting in my account. And after 30 days, you can cash it out, withdraw it into your bank account. So I've earned over £100 just by doing this, by referring my partner, my mum, and a few of my friends. I've got shares, just let them sit there and then withdrawn it into my bank account. So it's a great way to earn money if you're not going to trade it or going to be using stocks and shares. And all you have to do is deposit £1 on your friend to deposit £1. So it's quite simple to do. And then if you are a trader, you've got some free money in there to trade about and play about with.
That's interesting. That's blatantly because the cost of acquiring customers. They would rather pay people a free share. It's an interesting concept, as long as the people you refer don't end up spending all their money
losing
so with the usual caveats, we'll say that one. But that's an interesting one, actually. Right, on to the next app that you've got. Which one's this?
It's Too Good To Go. So Too Good To Go is basically an app where supermarkets and restaurants sell off their magic boxes of food that they haven't sold throughout the day. So Morrison's do this quite a lot. So if any food is going out of stock and going out of date in the next couple of days, they put it all into a magic box, put a really cheap price on it, and then people can go and pick it up. There's also BP garages. There's one around the corner to me, which is an M&S BP, and they sell a magic box which is over £15 worth of stuff, and they sell it for £4. So I go down there. There's usually about sort of 15 items in there, and and it's all for, say, £3-4, sometimes a couple of quid. And when restaurants are open as well, they sell off their remaining food, their remaining meals that they've cooked and perhaps didn't get to sell. So it's quite a good way of getting some cheap food. In my boxes in the past, I've got a load of fresh fruit, a load of ready meals that might be going out of date. Sometimes there's crisps and chocolate in there. So it's basically a free-for-all. It's whatever they have left. But it's a great way to get some extra food, and it's really cheap, and it's a way to cut down food wastage as well.
I like that. I mean, it's a bit of a lucky dip, but if you could get, like you said, £4 for something that's worth 15, that's pretty good. I mean, how do you find out about these things? Did you just come across apps like this when you're researching, or did you read about them? Because until somebody tells you about these apps, you won't know they're there.
It's a bit of both, really. I'm always scouring the web for different money apps and things, and I'm always scouring deal sites, so they just come up eventually. But yeah, that one's absolutely great.
That's my favourite so far, I think.
Ooh.
I like that because that also feeds quite nicely. That wasn't a pun, but to the idea that people who need help in this period where we are, where the economy is suffering and people are losing jobs, and the ability to be able to get food more cheaply and cut back on waste. And especially when you say about restaurants, I know a lot of them are closed now, but at some point there are, with this open shut element to an economy that we've got, there are people who in restaurants that are ordering food and then having to close, and therefore that food is going to waste. So I think it's a great idea.
That's a great app for those aspiring chefs out there as well, isn't it? If you've ever watched Ready Steady Cook with the green peppers and the red tomatoes, they're obviously tasked to cook up a meal from just £5 with a load of random ingredients. It kind of sounds like a bit of a Ready Steady Cook angle on getting some cheap food in. I think it's great.
I just had a look at a radius near where you live, Damien, and there's loads on there. There's Budgeons, there's Pizza Tonight, there's a Morrison's, so there's plenty on there. So yeah, just have a look where you are to see if there's anything nearby.
Great stuff. Look at that. Jordan's doing this live for me, sorting my life out for me. If I don't do it now, I'm going to look terrible, aren't I? Right. Okay, so that is my favourite so far. So let's see if you can better that one.
No pressure. The next one, the KFC app. If you've not downloaded the KFC app, you can get some free food straight away. So download the app and sign up to the Colonel's Club, which is their loyalty card and their loyalty scheme, which you can have on an app. And you get a free side straight away. You get 3 chicken stamps, which is the equivalent of a free side, which can get you some free hot wings, popcorn chicken, fries, beans, coleslaw, or a drink. So it's a nice, easy freebie. And even if they're closed at the moment, you can go through the drive-through and get it picked up.
Very nice. If you're a KFC type person, I'm more of a Nando's person, I have to admit. I never had
me
Nando's for years, and then I eventually got coerced to go there, and then I, like everybody else, I now like Nando's. Okay, so that was another food one. What have you got next for us? What number are we on, by the way? I think we must be on about 6 or 7, are we?
This one is 7, and this is another food one, but it's maybe for when restaurants are open. So it's the Meerkat Meals app and Meerkat Movies app. So I'm guessing you've all seen the adverts of buy car insurance and you get 2-for-1 meals and movies on the Meerkat Movies app. So that's basically what it is. You get 2-for-1 movies or meals for a whole year, and that's movies on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at selected cinemas like Odeon and Cineworld. And the meals is for a lot of local chains and also Pizza Hut. There was Frankie and Benny's on there and things like that. So there are bigger chains. But there is a way to get that app and that year's worth of free meals for 1 or 2 quid. And it's kind of a little trick because you have to buy an insurance policy on Compare the Market. But what they don't tell you is you can buy any insurance policy no matter what the price. So you can go on there and get the cheapest one, which happens to be a day's travel insurance in the UK. So just do a day, just search for a day, maybe in the next week or so, just for traveling in the UK on your own. You've got no pre-existing medical conditions, and it usually comes up at about £1 or £2. You purchase that.
I'm chuckling in the background. You probably can hear me, Jordan. It's just that you're a nightmare. You're a nightmare for T's and C's. There'll be people in these companies who make these things watertight. And then Jordan comes along and just drives a bus through it. I just think it's ingenious. I applaud it. I'm just in awe. Carry on. Sorry, Jordan.
No, it's fine. So yeah, just purchase the insurance policy for a couple of quid, and then you get a code to unlock the meals and the movies for £1 for the whole year. So maybe leave this a couple of months and then do it when we're coming out of lockdown, and then you've got a year's worth of half-price food and half-price cinema tickets, and it's fantastic.
That's actually become my favourite, I have to say. Do you sit there and look at all the T's and C's of these deals and sit there and think, well, what is it that it's in there? What can I do?
What can I exploit? Yeah. Not really. It's Well, a lot of the time I do have to message the company and say, look, can I actually do this? And they come back to you and say, yeah. In reality, compare the market. They want your custom. They want you to buy insurance from them. So I think this sort of deal is part of an outside company. So it probably doesn't make much odds to them whether you use it or not.
Yeah.
So,
and also, they can presumably push their marketing messages to you anyway because you're signed up to the whole thing, which, again, you say, for them, there is a probably potential win. So we must be coming towards the end of the list now. So where are we now?
This is number 8, and it's one called Sweatcoin. I'm hoping either of you are walkers, or you do a little bit of walking so you get your daily exercise in.
Yeah, I do my daily exercise in my local area in accordance with, obviously, lockdown rules. So I do actually quite like walking at the moment. We've been doing it quite a bit. I'm not like to be a hiker. I'm a member of the National Trust. I do like to go out and have a walk and try and get the kids to do it. So, yeah, I'm intrigued.
Good. So this app called Sweatcoin is an app where it basically pays you for walking. So every 1,000 steps you take, it generates 0.95 sweat coins, so just below 1 sweat coin. And once you earn enough, you can trade them in for different prizes and different sort of rewards. Some of them are better than others. So you can get a 60-day subscription to Scribed, which is usually $12.99, and that's just for a few sweat coins. You can get a free day pass to a gym for 5 sweat coins. And then there are some bigger prizes. So if you do it every single day, and walk in the equivalent to about 200,000 steps, you can trade in for £1,000 Thomas Cook holiday voucher, you can trade in for £1,000 cash, you can trade in for a TV, an iPhone XS. So if you do this for a long period of time and walk a lot of steps, then you could actually trade up for quite a nice prize.
Really? I mean, that's incredible. I mean, that's... I really like that. I think that's given that we're all now walking. I mean, I'm obsessed with steps at the moment because we had a step challenge, didn't we, Andy, in the office?
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah, we had a step challenge, and the idea that because obviously we were all in lockdown and to keep everybody's morale up at Money to the Masses, we used to do walk-in meetings. So we'd all be on the equivalent of Zoom calls on our phones, but we could be walking wherever we lived, and we would be trying to get each of us out from behind our desk, out from behind the computer. And while we're chatting and doing a meeting for like half an hour, we'd all be doing our steps. And we could actually collate our steps in a league table to see who would win. And Laura won that. But actually, Lauren found a way in which you can get a lot of steps. If you basically ride a horse, we suddenly noticed one day that Lauren had done 25,000 steps in a single day. And we were like, Lauren, how did you do that? And then I twigged, because I know that Lauren horse rides. And I was like, did you go horse riding yesterday by any chance? Which I'm not condoning any of this, but I'm just joining dots. I'm just putting it out there. Yeah, she went horse riding and a lot of steps in a single day. So, yeah, imagine that.
Let me guess, Damien, this is your favourite now. This is your new favourite.
No, it's not my new favourite. It isn't, actually. I don't horse ride, but it's not my new favourite. But I do like the idea because I do walk a lot now. So, Jordan, the grand finale.
There are 2 more. I can get through them really quickly. So the first one, this is for when we're travelling again, which I hope we can do this year. It's called Red by Do Free, which is DUFRY. And it's an app by Duty Free. So whenever you go into Duty Free, if you sign up to this app and scan your QR code that you get on the app, you get 5% off all your Duty Free purchases. And if you spend a lot in there, then you can get better rewards. So you can add up to 10% or 15%. So that'll be good if you're getting your Duty Free alcohol or things like that. And then finally, the last app is called Olio, which is OLIO. And it's when you have perhaps too much food in the house, if you've got canned goods, which you're not going to use, or if other people on the app, your neighbours, have food that they're not going to use, or they make too many brownies or things like that, you can post it on this app and trade it with your neighbours. So it's basically a way of cutting down food wastage, saving money on food. There's quite a few people on there which work on behalf of Tesco and Sainsbury's and the supermarkets. So when they have a little bit of excess stock, they can put it on there for people to get as well, so they get some freebies. And it's just a way to trade food that perhaps isn't going to get eaten or is just sitting in a cupboard that isn't being used.
I like that. I actually like the fact that your list had a slight tilt towards the food element because, like I said, in this environment, the pandemic has caused a real divergence in people's fortunes. There are people who are better off because of what's happening in the economy, actually generally the people who are wealthy and have assets. And there are people who've lost jobs and businesses that have collapsed and therefore are struggling. And I like the idea there are some apps and things out there that can help them be able to cut down their food bill as well. So, Jordan, that was brilliant. If people want to hear Jordan again in the future, we can always bring him on for his speed burst of money-saving things because it's something that we don't do. And if you want to hear more more of Jordan and his amazing escapades of money saving, then do check out his podcast. I'm sure you'll like it.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so glad I've joined this elite club of guests on the Money to the Masses podcast.
Your mug will be on its way. There are some listeners who have mugs as well, a very select group. But yep, we'll make sure you get your mug. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I've got 2 out of 6 now. I need to get the other 4.
Yeah, so brilliant stuff. Thanks again, Jordan and Damien. So moving on to the rest of the pod, you mentioned the black box last week and you've since looked into that a bit more, and it's going to be a piece on this week's pod. So what have we got?
So this was a task that I mentioned I started over the Christmas period. It's a task that's been on my radar for a long time, and the idea of this black box for your finances, and I call it a black book, it could be anything, but a place where important information is stored, whether that's online via some sort of password secure spreadsheet or document, or whether it's something physical like a book. And the idea being that if I got hit by a bus, then my spouse could find all the information about our finances. Because the thing with our finances, they're very idiosyncratic and they're very particular to a person. There's like this web of policies, investments, pensions, bank accounts, direct debits, you name it. And it's quite hard to unravel it. And what will happen is that if you were to die, then your spouse, if they don't know all of the areas of finance that you deal with, because lots of people, one person takes charge, or if it's split, there's still areas of their finance they don't fully know about. And if you were to die, then they would have a nightmare trying to piece that together. It's like having a jigsaw puzzle where you don't know how many pieces there are, and you don't actually know what the picture is you're trying to make. And I'm conscious of that. And so I've talked about it with my other half, and we decided that I pulled together this black book because you do your will, for example. We've talked about that a lot, but there are other things in the background because trying to find out the accounts and everything like that about your finances is very difficult. So the idea of my black book is I want to go through and tell people how I've done it. Now, there is lots of ways you can do it. There was a brilliant discussion in the Facebook group and the Money to the Masses community group, which Andy will put a link to in the show notes, actually, about people starting to discuss this very principle about what they do. And so I want to tell people what I do. They can take the learnings from that and apply it to their own finances. And in particular, I want to tell people the kinds of information that I put in that black book. And as I say, it's individual to people. It can be online, it can be a book itself. You need to check with the person who's most likely to pick up this bit of information. For example, I know that some people are nervous about having a physical book that's hidden somewhere in their house, because if somebody got hold of that, then there may be information in there. Now, I would say to that you can be careful about the types of information you put in the book that isn't necessarily useful to someone on its own. And also, don't forget, if someone breaks into your house and steals a book of information that lists your, say, for example, insurance policies, they are in your house. They're going to be taking a lot more other things that you're going to be worried about as well. So I think it's probably not the biggest thing that you necessarily would worry about, because this is trying to solve a problem about what would happen if I wasn't here. And the other thing, of course, you can do this online. There are people who might use Google Sheets, Google Docs, pass protected Excel spreadsheets. You need your other half to know where they live and the passwords to them. And so with a physical book, I'm going to talk about it as if it's a physical book. So you've decided you're going to do a notebook, and where you put that is obviously important. The other person has to know, you both have to know where it is. You may even want to tell a third party where it is. For example, my parents have told me where their will is in their house, because if they were to die, I could go and find it. And that's a good practice anyway, particularly the executors will know where it is. And it's a good practice to keep this black book somewhere that somebody who knows where your will is can access it. So keep it with the will as a physical thing, or some detail of where to find this information. You need to decide on the sort of whether you want to put passwords and things in there about banking and all that kind of stuff, which we'll come on to. One thing I would say is that I'm in a bit of a peculiar position, because obviously I've got an identical twin, and although face recognition is not meant to work across twins, we've worked out that mine does. So anything that I have, if I'm dead, my brother can pick up my phone and unlock it with his face, which is a very peculiar thing. I know it's something that shouldn't be happening, but one thing I would say is, to the backdrop of my black book, my wife knows my passcode to my phone. She also knows my login to my email, and there's a 2-factor authentication on there. So when you log in, you get the PIN number, like a PIN number sent to your phone, and then you put that into your browser to be able to unlock your passwords. Basically, my wife could unlock my phone. I don't have anything to hide. My life is fairly boring, to be quite frank. And so she can access any of the apps, and in particular she can access my main email account, which is the most precious thing that you pretty much have. But more importantly, they can gain access to anything they pretty much need to. The other thing I would add is that this is fundamentally about trying to help. The reason I've done it is to help my wife, if I were to die, to be able to unravel areas of the finance that I look after. And I also, in this black book, at the beginning, have made notes. So, for example, I pointed to the direction of, say, episode 277 of this Money to the Masses podcast, because I talk about probate and how that works. And I know she can find some of that information perhaps by Googling it, but there is going to be, bizarrely, my voice telling her about probate, which would be a bit weird. But also, this is all about people and powers of attorney, because you could become incapacitated at some point in the future, and people would need to know what's going on in your finances. So lots of people have documents everywhere in their house. They probably have a special drawer or something like that, and there's just a mess. I'm going to tell you what's in my black book. So page 1 is in there, and notes about where our will is. So my wife and my will, where they are. She knows where they are, but it's for somebody else. Say, for example, my brother, who might want to know where they are if we both were to be hit by a car or die in a car crash together. I've also put in there our solicitor's name and telephone number, because obviously they have a copy of our will as well, and they could seek the help of them if they need to. There's also some notes in there of my view of maybe people she could ask for help. Now, financial advisors, for example, you could see a financial advisor. I've named somebody in there who I trust, who I would say to my wife, if you have any issues, go and see this person, because I trust them. Pay them what their rate is, but I know they're not going to rip her off, because they're not that kind of person. So she isn't cast out to try and unravel something, or if she needs extra help or advice, and cast out for somebody who's going to potentially take advantage of her. So with those sort of caveats, what's at the beginning and what I've put in there, because it isn't just about documents, it can be a bit like Warren Buffett, who put a view in there and told his wife what he would like her to do in terms of investing, which was basically to buy an investment tracker. But anyway, I digress. So let me start off. In my black book, I've got a list of all my personal insurances. So when I say mine, I mean my family's. So they will be listed, for example, life insurance policies. So it will have the company name, the policy number, and any contact numbers I have for that policy. To do this, to fill this in, I've had to go through and find all of those documentations, the policy numbers, the contact details, the company names, and write them in a table. So it will be who is covered under the policy, what it does, when I took it out, how long it lasts for, what type of policy it is, does it need to be renewed? Medical insurance is a good example of that. The premiums I pay on each policy, so she could cross-reference that with our bank account to see, that's what that direct debit is for. That's paying like life insurance. I put in if there's any annual increases on the premium, so she's aware of what accounts the money is taken from, like our bank accounts. What is the purpose of the policy, and whether they can or should cancel it after I've died, or whether she should in this example, but I'm talking generically for you guys. And what happens if I were to die with that policy? For example, my mortgage is a decreasing, obviously, repayment mortgage. So there is a corresponding life insurance policy that will clear that mortgage that decreases over time, and it's obviously a fixed premium that I've got on that. So I put in there and stated that policy's aim is to clear the mortgage. Now, it may be you've got multiple policies over time. Some of them might be level term policies that are there for a lump sum for your partner to use to carry on once you've gone. There could be a family income benefit plan that might pay out an annual income. Health insurance policies could exist. So they might have to look at the health insurance policy, because obviously you are no longer on the policy. The other key thing that I've put in there, which I want everybody to do, is put whether the policy is in trust. So if you've got a life insurance policy, look to see whether you've placed it into trust. And we've done a whole podcast in the past about the importance of trust, but very quickly, the benefit of a trust is if, for example, I want all my assets to go to my wife, which I do, then having a life insurance policy that's in trust, that means the money goes to her, means the payout is outside of my estate, and it will be paid more quickly. It will be paid before having to get probate. So it means she can get her hands on the life insurance money quickly. and that will help her financially. So one of the good things about doing this task is you're going to sit there and question whether policies should be in trust or not. And if they're not, you need to ring up companies and say, is it in trust? Because you might not remember. For example, some of my life insurance policies I took out 14 years ago. And so you need to go and ring them up, check if it is, if it isn't, whether you want it to be, need it to be. You can ring up a protection advisor and check and ask them. And then you can get the form, and it's literally will be a short form, easy to fill out. You sign it and send it back to them. And that will save a hell of a lot of hassle for your other half. So that's the sort of protection area. Like I say, make sure you stipulate what the policies are for, what will happen when they pay out. Let's say, for example, there's a policy that does multiple things like life insurance and critical illness. What will happen if you were to die on that policy? For example, it will pay out the life insurance, and then therefore the critical illness element will be gone. That kind of thing, you therefore need to clarify in your own head. What's great, by doing this, you're going to start realizing there may be questions that you don't know or things you've forgotten because it's been a long time with these policies. And the other thing is, what you will do is by going through these papers, you'll probably discover a policy you'd forgotten about, maybe that you had for a long period of time. And there have been people, and Andy could tell you this when we used to work more in the protection world when we first met, there'll be people who suddenly unearth policies they didn't even know they had, that they've been paying towards for years, that they could claim on in the event of a death or something like that. So those are roughly the things that I would definitely put down. The reason why the start date I often think is important, because you may have paperwork for a policy and a start date, but that company might have been bought out by another company subsequently. And so you may end up going along a paper trail to try and find where that policy actually is now, who now owns that company and that policy. And when you ring that company up, if you tell them where it was bought or who the original company it was bought through, they will be able to locate it on their systems. Now, I say this from a position of knowledge. I remember when I worked in the pensions review many years ago, and I used to have to track down people's old policies that were transferred into other pension products. They may have, for example, been with a company like Abbey Life. And Abbey Life was eventually bought by Lloyds, but they're completely different companies with like legacy administration platforms. So if they want to look up customer details, these things were on microfiches. So there wasn't a computer program to go and find them. They'd have to go and ring up somebody, let's say in Edinburgh, who'd have to go down to a basement to go and find the microfiche and go and look at scrolling through to find the policy details. So having that original date or company policy number that when you bought it, that is useful when somebody's trying to piece this stuff together. Don't forget, it's really going to be a detective work. I'm going to move on now, current accounts or savings accounts. Now, again, I've listed all these down. So I've put down whose name the account is, what type of account it is. So is it a savings account? Is it a current account? What's the sort code and account numbers, the bank in question? One of the things that is very important is, when I say whose account the name is in, is whether it's a sole name or a joint name. And if it's a joint name with your spouse, then obviously they're going to still have access to the money. This is something that is a personal opinion of mine. I think it's good to have most stuff in a joint account, because let's say my wife dies or the other way around, I die, then the person left behind still has access to the money. Because if there's a savings account that's just in my wife's name, for example, when she dies, it's going to be more of a headache for me to eventually get round to be able to access that money. I will do in time, because her will leaves all of her assets to me, but it makes it much more hard work because you have to unravel the estate. So the other thing I would do is put down the purpose of the account. And I'll give you an example. I've got an account that exists purely because it enables me to pay money into a savings account for my children. And you have to do it with some banks via their own current account. And so that current account, they'd be sitting thinking, well, why have we got this account then? Because it isn't involved in our day-to-day finances, then I put notes in there and say, like, this account is just literally a conduit for our ability to fund these savings accounts for the kids. That explains it away. They then know, right, this is something that isn't important in the grand scheme of things. There's nothing that's going to come and bite me when this gets eventually closed down or anything like that, anything else to think about. I also put it down what payments go in and out each month regularly on each account. And that's in particular direct debits. So that is something that I think is important to list what they are, list the amounts and what they're for. I'll come on to bills later on. So when people look at their accounts, we don't all look at our accounts all the time. They want to be able to see quickly, because don't forget, even if my wife and I know what's going on in our accounts and we both know what we're paying, if we both get hit by a bus, then somebody else has got to come in and work this stuff out. Or like we say, we aren't incapable of running our finances because something happens to us, but we're still alive. Somebody else has got to come along and try and unravel, what are all these direct debits for? How important are they? Do I continue with them? All these kind of things. The information is helpful. I also put in there any rules that surround the accounts. Like I said, if there's a certain amount that has to be paid in each month into a children's savings account to secure a particular interest rate. This is the kind of stuff you wouldn't think about, but if I died, my wife would obviously want to continue the way things are going, then it's good to let her know the issues that could arise if, for example, she stopped a particular direct debit, or if things would change. She needs to make sure that we're still paying money into certain places. The other thing I would mention on the joint account and the direct debit element, if one of us was to die, then by having most of our bills come out of our joint account and listed, at least they can go down and go, oh, right, the gas and electricity is still going to be paid, because they can marry up the direct debit, because they can look at the amount. I would specify, like I say, I'll come on to the bills a bit later, the actual amount, so they can tie them up and see that, right, that's for gas and electric. I don't have to worry about that. The other thing I put in there is closed accounts. Now, this isn't key because you really want to put the stuff that's relevant. But if somebody starts filing through some paperwork, they might find old accounts and you might say, no, this is closed. So I regularly will update this black book to cross out accounts, because you do move accounts. We switch accounts, don't we? We move things around. So that's something to make sure that you put in there at some point. Because don't forget, the other thing to bear in mind is that all the bank accounts you have and the various parts of your finances are cogs in a well-oiled machine. That's the aim anyway. And so what you're doing is showing people what all these cogs are. So it's like you lifting up the bonnet of a car and it's humming along nicely, and they're trying to work out what they can pull out or unplug and stuff like that to stop it all collapsing. And so one of the things I also do at the back of the black book is I've pulled together a picture which is basically a flow chart of how our finances work on a monthly basis. So money comes in here, money goes out here, like in terms of income, expenditure, bills, budgeting, all those things, money that goes into savings or investments. So you've got this circular picture, so you can see overall all the cogs in the machine. And what's brilliant when you do this, I did this before Christmas, I noticed some of these things that are just pointless. I've got legacy accounts that have got 10p in, things like that. I think, look, I've got to get round to tidying this stuff up, because this is no point having these accounts anymore, because they're just there doing nothing. And like all these things, I personally think if an account's there that's not doing anything, it becomes a bit of a liability, particularly from a fraud perspective. So let me just rattle through some of the others that I've got in there. Credit cards. So we're moving on to debts. I've got our credit cards in there. So this is for everybody in the family, so me and my wife in this case. Who's the account holder? When and where did I take it out? What are the last 4 digits on the credit card itself, so you can easily match them up? What is the credit limit? What's the current balance on these? And like on the savings accounts and bank accounts, I also put down current balances. I update them once a year, but it gives a feel for the time that I've done at the time I should say, I've done the black book. Any notes on there? So how the credit card is maybe used. So this is the regular spending one that we use during the month, or how we pay them. So is it paid by direct debit or by bills? It's one of the reasons I like paying by direct debit. You can't miss a payment, so you won't get a black mark on your credit report, but it also means that things can keep going along nicely should the worst happen. Contact details, like I say, for the relevant credit companies, and any closed credit cards, because again, they might get bits and pieces come through the post that they open up and go, well, what's this about? This he didn't tell me about this. And it might just be something from a legacy that no longer exists. Loans, you want to do the same thing. It's important to know what the purpose of the loan is. I'll give you an example, a car loan. So people might have an agreement for a car that they drive around. You've got to include those sorts of things. So what is the cost? How much do you pay? What is the reference number? I'll tell you one thing, most people won't know the agreement number for their car finance because it's not made obvious to you when you sign up. Dig that out, write it down so they've got it to hand, and who they should contact so they can find out what to do, because you've got to think this black book is the starting point. So it's a bit like having all the pieces of the jigsaw, the picture, they can eventually get to what they're trying to solve. The aim of the black book really is to enable people to contact the people they need to contact in your finances to ask questions, to find out what they need to do, and then to be able to move forward with. That is far easier if they have this starting point, because all it then becomes is a series of calls, as it were, and they will have the information that the people are going to ask them for when they ring them up. The other thing is on things like loans, when is it going to be paid off? The outstanding balances, when decisions need to be made. So on a car, for example, when are you going to have to make a decision with the car garage about taking it back in if it's on some kind of lease? They will need to obviously contact them regarding what will happen with that credit arrangement. And the other thing to bear in mind you don't think about is whose name is the car in. The sorts of things that you have to do to keep the warranty going. So you might have to do a service once a year. Sort of silly things like this will mean that the warranties won't be negated. So generally speaking, any warranties that you may have, regardless whether it's for a car, but for anything else that exists, they are useful. I talked about insurances earlier, but it may be insurances. You may have insurances, for example, your boiler to make sure it gets fixed. Well, how much does that cost? Who's it with? What's the contact number? So if the boiler goes down, then they can ring up and sort it out. They might not realise that they have boiler cover, for example, because they put one person in the relationship might be the person who sorts out all those things. Your mortgages, again, know the type of mortgage, the rate you're on, the type of rate. So is it variable? Who's the company? The telephone number, the account number, what's outstanding, any additional mortgages that you may have, because don't forget, you maybe think you're paying a certain amount a month, but you could have two payments. You may have an original mortgage and you may have taken out a second smaller one to, say, do up your kitchen and bathroom. The person would probably want to know, well, why is there two payments? Explain why there is two payments. Lots of this stuff gets lost in the mist of time, and put on there the notes to link it back to the life insurance, for example, if there is one that clears the mortgage if you were to die. Obviously, is the mortgage in joint names? When does it need to be reviewed in the future? Is there a fixed term, for example, that will come to an end? This sort of information will help them going forward. On investment and pensions, I'll deal with investments first of all. List down the investments. Who are they with? What are the policy numbers? Again, what were the origins? When were they taken out? What's the purpose of the investment? I mean, are you saving for something in particular? Policy numbers, contact details, that's the sort of thing you want to have. Approximate balance, who owns them? Is it owned by just one person? The purpose, children's junior ISAs, for example, they need to be in there. What would you do if the person was to die? So, for example, if I was to die, if we're funding junior ISAs for our children, like the Millionaire episode that we did, then that plan needs to be put down somewhere so that it can be continued, so you understand, because again, these things get lost in the mists of time. After a while, you forget why things are set up the way they are. Are there any investments that are closed? Are there investments where you don't necessarily have an online account, but there may be premium bonds, for example, that you actually have some documents that they need to have and use? Tell them where the paperwork is for all of this stuff. Is it in a particular box? In order to do this black book, you've had to compile all this stuff together. Shred the stuff you don't need. Why make it hard for the next person to have to do all that? Just shred it. If you don't need it, let's get rid of that stuff. It's a declutter exercise, and I've done loads of shredding recently, and it's quite sort of cathartic, really, because it's making me look at some of this stuff and double check things but get rid of it. So in the pension space, it's a similar thing. Type of pension, if it's a pension that's relating to an employment, what's the employer, the policy number, the original company. When I say type of pension, is it a defined benefit, final salary, or something like a SIP? Contact details, particularly company work, you want to have the contact details of HR, for example. If it's past employments, what was that employment? What dates did you work there? If it's something like a SIP, were there transfers into that pension from previous ones? So did you consolidate pensions? When and where did you do that? Because again, they might find there's some paperwork that comes through, or they find other paperwork you've forgotten about and think, oh, what's this? I mean, in my wife's family, I tell you this story, there was somebody who eventually got dementia, unfortunately, and they started squirreling away the financial documents that they had in a kind of just tidying up, because they were in charge of all the finances. They just started hoarding, and they were hoarding things. And when that person eventually passed away, they started to find this documentation in random places in the garage. And that's the sort of thing people don't realise happens. And they were like, well, what's all this stuff? I didn't even know. These share certificates, what are these? And so it's good to try and give as much information as you can so that doesn't happen, because you just don't know what's going to happen to your own health. On pensions, retirement ages, any death nominations on there. So if you have a pension, for example, who is nominated to inherit that pension, make sure that you have nominations. That's the other thing. A bit like the trust, it'll make you go back and look at, oh, okay, what is going to happen to this pension? Have I put in place my requests that I want to be fulfilled if I'm gone? Again, any paperwork. Now, moving swiftly on to bills, I've gone through all my bills and listed them. What are they? The best way to do this is go down your direct debits, but you may have bills that aren't direct debits. For example, you may have a water bill that you pay via cheque, or that's a bit old school, but you might pay via online banking. Don't forget, not every bill will be via direct debits. You need to list them. Account numbers, who they're with, what's the purpose. So utilities are fairly obvious in terms of the purpose, but you may have some other kind of insurance that you have that might be relevant. You may be paying insurance for some kind of funeral plan or something like that. How much is the monthly payment or annual payment or quarterly? Don't forget, some direct debits aren't monthly. So if someone looks at their monthly direct debits, don't forget you've got to also look at going back further. You might have subscriptions that come out quarterly or yearly. So make sure you put them down so people know, because then they can notify the relevant companies. If you list all the bills that you have coming out of your accounts, like I say, policy numbers, usual setup, the company and the purpose, and what to do with them once you've passed away. And finally, I mean, that's a real whistle-stop tour of my particular black book. But ponder whether you've got anything else you want in there, maybe other assets that you have that you put in there. If you own a business, put that information in there. What's going to happen? Put in the details of the maybe other partners in the business and who they need to go and talk to and what will happen. On the insurance side, I should have mentioned, if you have a business, for example, I'm a perfect example of this, things like insurances that will pay out for shareholder protection. If you have a business where you're one of the directors in the business and there's more than one, then you really should have protection in place that will ensure that each person, if they were to die, would be effectively bought out of the business by the remaining directors. Now, if you haven't got that in place, then you need to talk to an insurance specialist and a solicitor to draw up the relevant documents. And it's well worth doing, because it means that your other half is looked after. Basically, they get a payout from your business. So you need to put in the details of what's going to happen, those policy numbers and details, the amounts that are going to be paid out, what they're going to receive from the business, what's going to happen to the share of the business. You should have thought about all these things. And if you haven't, then this will prompt you to suddenly go, yeah, I need to do this. Because there's nothing worse than if a director were to die, that no one's had this conversation, because then the partner of that particular director could be left in the lurch. And also the fellow directors, it's going to be a problem for them. The other thing to mention is that passwords and things like that, to be able to get into online banking or any particular logins, it could even be logins for utilities. One thing I would say to bear in mind is a lot of browsers these days, for example, Chrome, enable you to save passwords in there securely. So you can then allow your other half, if they know your log on for your computer and your email, they could go in and just go into the browser and it will automatically put in the username and password, so they can just log in. You have to allow it to do that, but it is secure, and therefore they could log into all these things. So that is one thing to do if you don't want to put down usernames and password in case somebody finds your book. But again, you could put something online, but again, that has its own security issues.
Another tip may be to think about social media side of things. I've heard people have issues with legacy stuff to do with social media accounts and partners not wanting to be constantly reminded of birthdays and things like this on Facebook. And you need to really have passwords to be able to access those things, to shut them down should you want to. You might need to discuss that with your partner and, consider saving passwords for that kind of.
Yeah, and like I say, they can be saved down into devices which they can have access to anyway. And the thing is, there's a lot of trust that goes into this. That's the point of it, isn't it? I know there'll be some people thinking, well, I don't want my other half to have access to my phone. Well, I mean, quite frankly, if you don't want them to have access to your own phone, then maybe you aren't the sort of person who wants to care about having some kind of black book that's going to help them when you're gone. I don't know. So it's not perfect. None of this stuff is. But what I want you to do is tell people this is how I'm doing it. And if you've got any other ideas and ways you've done it, or anything you think that I may have missed, or tips you want to give other people, then put it in the thread on the Facebook page. But the key thing is, start this process. The one thing it will also do, which is particularly useful, is it will make you find paperwork. It will make you find policy numbers, and it will make you suddenly realise, I don't know quite what will happen with that if I died. Do you know what? I'm going to go find out. And that sort of stuff is really useful. It gets you doing almost a big spring clean of your finances. And I have to say, I sleep easier because I've done this, because it means that worst comes to the worst, that there is something that's going to be there. And like I said, if my wife and I died at the same time, then I know that my executor can come in and be able to have a much easier time of it, to be able to help my children ultimately, because our estates will feed through to them. So there you go, Andy. That's the Black Book. Oh, one final thing I just want to mention. If you do an online will, then some of the services, I think there's one or two, Quill being one, might offer something that is almost like a lockbox where you can put some of this information if you want to. So yeah, I know most people aren't customers of these will writing services, so therefore the idea of the Black Book is relevant to the majority of people, but it's something to bear in mind, because I know Andy's talked about it in the past on the podcast.
Right, so moving on then, Damien, this is the last piece of the pod, and I believe it's going to be one of the fastest pieces in history, isn't it?
It is, but it's no less important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a mug to the person who wins a challenge. And the challenge is to do with direct debits. Now, a really good bit of spring cleaning, especially in the start of the new year, is to go and look at your direct debits on your accounts. And look at what you're paying for. Look at the standing orders as well, because it may seem odd to many people listening to this podcast, but I can guarantee you there are almost probably the majority of people out there lose track of the direct debits that they're paying because they're so busy, they get caught up in what they're doing in life, probably signed up to something somewhere along the line. Go and look at your direct debits. And the reason why it's quite useful, because I mentioned the black box or the Black Book principle, if you've gone and started to think about that, then you've probably already gone through your direct debits and listed them. But even if you haven't, go through your direct debits. If you go onto your banking apps, you will be able to see a list of them. Or if you use some of the budgeting apps, you will get a list of them in there. For example, Emma does quite a nice list of all your standing orders and direct debits in one screen across your various accounts if you sign up and use their service, which on the free plan, of course. That's quite useful. Find all the direct debits. Do you need them? If not, cancel them. And by doing that, I guarantee you there'll be lots of people who will end up saving money. And what I want to do is whoever can send in, you just have to tell me, or via Twitter, email, whatever you want, tell me the money that you saved by doing it. So a direct debit, the amount that you've saved a month by actually looking at direct debit and realizing that you didn't use that service or didn't need that service and cancelling it. And the person who I'm most impressed with will get a mug. In fact, if there's a whole bunch of people I'm impressed with, they will also get mugs. I'm feeling generous.
Very generous in the new year. Yeah, I think that's a great challenge for the listeners. So yeah, if you can do that, check however you do it via online banking, cancel those direct debits. Let's create this group of people who are saving thousands of pounds just from doing something really, really simple. Good stuff. So that's it. We're done this week. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with the number 2. And of course, we've got the Facebook group. That is really flying at the moment. We're getting hundreds of member requests. So don't miss out. Make sure that you're part of that group. You can learn a lot. You can ask questions, meet like-minded people. It's great. So that is facebook.com/groups/money-to-the-masses. And of course, lastly, please review the podcast. It's a new year. We're getting lots of new listeners. By doing so, go onto iTunes, pop a review in there, or your podcast app of choice, and it means that we get boosted up the charts and more people can join the revolution. Damien, we're done, aren't we?
We're done. So until next week.
Until next time.